Hi, welcome to the small shed. Today I want to deal with 10 things in the shed that are trying to kill you. See you in a minute. Now that's probably a bit over dramatic. These are things that, not the whirly spinny things that are sharp that you're using all the while, the saws, drills, things like that can inflict damage on you. This is the more subtle stuff that you might not think about straight away. They're things that have occurred to me over the last 18 months or 2 years while I've been working in the shed that you don't always think about at the time, but can actually cause you some quite severe injury. Start off with an example. Number one is fire. Now, it's very unlikely you're going to get a fire in the shed unless you're doing shogi-ban or whatever it is, where you're burning the wood with a blow lamp. But you've got electric fires, heaters, and the things that you have to watch are things like oil-soaked rags. If you've got linseed oil on a rag and you leave it lying around, there is a possibility that it will spontaneously combust and you can burn your shed down. It's something that you've got to be aware of and store them carefully in either metal tins or lay them out and dry them out and put them under water, all sorts of things like that. If you look it up, there's a lot of reference to it on the internet. And looking at that, you've got to think about how you get out your shed, whether you've got an extinguisher in your shed. I've got windows in the shed which you'd think, oh, you'd open the window and get out that way if I was blocked in, but they've all got restrictors on them, and the key to the restrictors is in the cupboard over there. So if I can't get at that over that side of the shed for any reason, I'm into trying to break double glazed aluminium framed partition sort of windows, which is not an easy thing to do if you're full of smoke and flames. So you've got to think about fire, think about your fire exits. As I say, it's not a major happening that's going to happen every week, but it's something, as long as you're aware of and can plan for, you've got that contingency planning under your belt. So think about fire, think about your exits, and think about how to deal with it. Secondly is a stranger one, and that's visitors. On 2 or 3 occasions, people have come into the shed when I've been working with PPE on and working on a machine, and if somebody touches you on the shoulder, the natural instinct is to jump because you're shocked, because you're not used to it, you're not expecting it. And if you've got a sharp pointy thing in your hand at the time, it's not really good result. So try and make your family and friends aware that if you're out in the shed and you're working, not just to creep up behind you and tap you on the shoulder. It doesn't do well. And the other thing is, if you have visitors in the shed like children or anything, even if you're not working, you come back to the shed a day later or whatever, and you plug something in, and if it's like an angle grinder, if it's been switched on by the kids without you realising it, there's a possibility that things can happen that you don't expect to. So be aware of visitors. Now the next thing I want to have a look at is falling objects. You can see that when you start bashing around in the shed, shaking the place, if you've got timber stored up above you or on shelves or workbenches that you're working underneath, it's very easy to get stuff fall down on top of you and give you a clout round the back of the head. Yes, even the humble track saw on its hinge mount can just work itself loose while you're working on the table and swing down, and as I know to my cost on several occasions, it will give you a sharp rap on the top of the head. Now the fourth item I wanted to look at is dust, and I loosely refer to it as particulates because it's not just dust. One of the most important things I think I've bought in the shed, and it cost about £30 I think, was the little dust monitor that I've got. And what it's taught me is that whilst you are obviously putting PPE on when you're cutting wood and routering and spraying and that sort of thing, that danger exists long after you've finished. And if you've got something you can look at on the wall and you can see that the levels of dust have dropped to virtually nothing, that's the time you take your dust mask off. What tends to happen is that because they're not very nice things, you put them on, you do your job, you take the dust mask off, and I've found that it can be anything up to an hour if you've got the door shut until that air is really safe enough not to be using a mask. And it's the unknowns as well. It's obvious that machinery like saws and that are causing dust, routers, but it was only when I turned around and looked at the monitor I was horrified when I was using the little laser engraver. That produces far more particulates of a very small size than anything I've got. It can send it off the scale in a matter of minutes. So be aware of what you're using, get yourself a little monitor and keep an eye on it, and also then you're into ventilation, air scrubbers, and making sure that you've got good pickup equipment on the saws and things to actually vacuum the stuff away in the first place. Next thing I want to talk about is tiredness, and loosely speaking, maybe even alcohol. It's very easy to think that because you're tired you can still go out and do a bit of work after a long day at work, pop out in the shed. I've noticed on one or two occasions that when I've done things when I've been tired, you come back to it the next day and it's a complete and utter mess. And that's something which you've got to be aware of, because it's your judgment that's being impaired. So if you are tired, if you have had a drink, just stay out of the shed and have a rest until you're better, because it probably is likely to cause you some sort of an injury if you're not careful, just through a silly mistake because you're not quite 100% on the ball with it mentally. Now I'm fortunate in this shed that of all the things that it is warm and dry. It's not very big, but it's warm and dry. The shed I had previously was damp and cold, and there were a lot of problems with that, with damage to equipment from rust and all that sort of thing. But one of the hidden dangers is mould, and you see it a lot on anything that's damp. You get this black mould, and it is one of the worst things you can find for getting breathing problems with. It can get into your lungs and cause all sorts of problems. So if you have got a shed that's damp, make sure it's well ventilated, make sure you keep on top of mould. I used to find a bleach solution, water and bleach, just wash everything down just to kill it, because if that gets into your lungs, again, it's not good long term for your health. Now if you're running a business and you are putting people out in the field on their own, you have to have some sort of strategy for lone working. It's sort of duty of care. People do it at home and don't think anything about it, but the risks are just the same. You are isolated, you are probably in an environment where nobody is local. You know, if I started shouting help, nobody would hear me in here. You have to think about what will happen if you suddenly take ill, if you do have an accident. You've got electric in here, if you get an electric shock, anything like that. Have a think about the fact that you're out there on your own and there's nobody going to help you. So there have been one or two good videos. I know Andy McClellan did one on first aid. He's got basically a first aid kit more or less at floor level, in case he chops a finger off or anything and you collapse down on the floor. You've at least got something down there. I'm not suggesting necessarily that's where you need to be going with things like this unless you're using a lot of power tools. But just think, have a mobile phone with you. I've always nowadays, when I'm out in the shed, got a mobile phone with me and leave it charged up and make sure it's fully working. Make sure there's a first aid kit in the shed somewhere, just for the little nicks and things, but anything any more serious, if you do need something in a hurry to block up a wound or anything, it's no good scrabbling around for a bit of old kitchen roll. On a similar vein to tiredness and maybe alcohol is illness, and that covers a whole spectrum. That's not just physical illness, mental illness in terms of depression, that sort of thing. They're all things that can again impair your judgment. I had a spell over Christmas, as I may have mentioned, my brother sadly passed away. And I did a couple of videos. I was in the middle of doing the 12 days of Christmas videos. And I came home the one day having had a not very good day at the hospital with him. And I put a video up, loaded it up, ready to go. And I came back to it the next morning and it was complete garbage. All of the typing was wrong. It was all out of order. I'd hit wrong buttons. There was, uppercase where there should be lowercase, all sorts. I hadn't noticed at the time, but my mind just wasn't fully focused on what I was doing. So if you are ill or feeling a bit low, feeling depressed, think about what you're doing out there. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute if you're feeling depressed that you don't go out into the shed if it helps and if it makes you feel better. But be careful what tools you're using and make sure that whatever you're doing it safely. Don't start embarking on very fine work on a circular saw, because it's probably not going to end well. Next thing to think about is age, which I am noticing increasingly now. If you're over 70, you need a doctor's note to drive. That must tell you something about how that has affected all aspects of your body. It affects your vision, it affects your strength, it affects your reaction times, it affects your mental speed of doing things, and it affects your balance. So again, as you get older, start to make sure that what you're doing you're thinking about a bit more. I used to just climb up ladders and lean over and get things to stretch a bit further. You can't do it as you get older, not without the likelihood of a fall. Now finally, let's take a look at PPE. PPE is brilliant. It's what you need when you're working. But one of the problems it brings is, again, this impairment of your senses. With these on, I haven't got a clue what's going on around me. I can't hear what's going on. I can't hear if something's going wrong. I can't hear if somebody's come in the workshop. And I can't hear if there's something or somebody crying out for help or anything. So be aware that with those on, it's not going to help you hear anything very well. That I don't think is a great problem, but again, it's just restricting movement, and it's something, again, you can't be heard if you're talking to somebody. And the glasses, now, yeah, I ought to have prescription ones or lenses in because I'm short-sighted naturally and I can't get glasses and goggles on very well, so I tend not to use them because I'm working up close and I can see quite well. But again, my vision is impaired by those. But it's not that, it's the fact that your peripheral vision is being spoiled by some of the sides on these things, that they're not as, they tend to get covered in dust and scratched. They're not as good as your natural eyesight. So whilst again I'm not saying for a minute don't use it, just be aware that your hearing, your vision, your sense of smell, if there's a fire or anything else, is being impaired by the PPE that you're wearing. So just be aware of that as well. So I hope that was at least a bit thought-provoking. 10 things, as I say, that may or may not be out to try and harm you in the shed. Fire, visitors, falling items, tiredness and alcohol, damp, lone working, illness, PPE and age are all things that are going to get at you at some point. Just be aware of it and try and be safe out there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll have something else. I'll see you then. Bye.